Can better sanctions weaken Russia? That is the title of the article by Jeffrey Sonnenfeld, who supposedly led the movement to isolate Russia, along with co-author Stephen Tian. Writes that the current sanctions regime does not have enough enforcement and ignores key commodities. So basically, the enforcement is that the West has to step up this enforcement mechanism of sanctions, which are illegal because they haven't been adopted by the UN Security Council. And the key commodities, well, who are you talking about? You're talking about India and China. So if you put a 500% tariff on India and China, what's going to happen is they're just going to stop trading with you. And China in particular, they'll cut off the rare earths that the United States needs for its war machine and for its chips. So, this basically spitting into the wind is not a good life philosophy, but it seems to be adopted or adoptable by this Yale University professor, Jeffrey Sonnenfeld. And why is there so much Russia hate in Yale University? There was also this Yale Institute that put out that phony report about the stolen Ukrainian children, and they took all these satellite photos of kids' camps, and they calculated out that there were 20,000 Ukrainian kids who had been stolen, ripped out of their mother's arms by the Russian forces and taken to Russia to be indoctrinated and turned into these little Russian soldiers. So anyway, there just seems to be a whole bunch of that at Yale University. And of course, those people eventually wind up in the U.S. government, running some department, working in the CIA, basically incapable of any independent thought, whether this is a good idea or not. And then we get to the bottom of this article here, after mentioning about the seizing the Russian frozen assets. Belgium already said, no, that's the stupidest idea on the planet. We're not going to do it. No matter how much the Ursula von der Leyen pushed and the European leaders of France, Germany, UK spoke about, all we need to do is seize the Russian frozen assets. And little Belgium with, small country said, no way, back off, buddy. So, that whole topic is dead. But, it's been pushed for a while. They pushed it actually from day one. And Belgium, basically saw the truth that if they did that, they would lose a lawsuit in the future, and then they'd wind up paying a whole lot more than what they seized. So the point of this article is doing nothing is the most dangerous path of all. So, you're going to go out of your way to try to bully Russia and to apply illegal sanctions that have not been adopted by the United Nations Security Council. And why? Because you want to make Uncle Sam happy. But you know what? Uncle Sam is starting to get really greedy and really like acting like a bully. So maybe some people are going to I don't really feel like playing this game anymore. So, this whole argument that they tried to make year after year, I think it's dead in the water. Then we have this other article here from the Bank of Finland or whatever, the banking institution in Finland. So sanctions against Russia, what have been the effects so far? Western sanctions have hindered Russia's production of many goods and led to a widening budget deficit. While these measures alone cannot end the war, they do limit Russia's ability to replace its destroyed military equipment and finance the campaign. Well, this article is from 2023. We are in 2026 in January. So have these sanctions limited Russia's ability to replace its destroyed military equipment or finance the campaign? No. So again, when you're motivated by hate and by acting like a bully, generally speaking, you're kind of, strike out at the plate because you just continue to do actions which are ineffective. And then we get down here to the bottom of the article. But the longer the war and sanctions continue, the more difficult Russia's fiscal position becomes. Waging a war requires huge sums of money, and in Russia's 2022 budget, a third of the funds were allocated to the military and internal security. The original budget for 2023 expected nominal expenditures to decline, but this is now clearly very unrealistic, and sanctions are hitting Russia's tax revenues. Oh boy, we're just about there. We're going to collapse their economy. So, increasingly, this seems to be the main effect of Western policies on the Russian economy. In theory, this effect will accumulate over time. The fighting looks likely to grind on for months to come, but with each day spent on the battlefields, the chokehold of economic sanctions is set to get tighter. So, in 2023, Russia had a GDP increase of over 4%. In 2024, increase of GDP over 4%. So, did those sanctions have the effect that they were looking for and they promised? No. So, anyway, we go to the GDP graph of Russia. This comes from oanda.com. I'll leave the links below so you can access the information if you want to. And so we see Russia's GDP. It tanked in 2022. I have to tell you, there was a tough initial decision, but after that, it recovered, and you can see over 4%. And then 2025, it dropped down. What was for 2025? It was like I think 1.7%. For 2026. It looks like they're going to be around 1%. So anyway, these sanctions haven't destroyed the Russian economy. This is, there are European countries that have less of a GDP growth than Russia, and they don't have 30,000 sanctions. So that tells me that something good's going on in that economy. And then we have the Chatham House. So they're back on the question of the sanctions. The West should begin by more strictly enforcing the existing sanctions regime. The illegal sanctions regime, by using what to justify it? Because Uncle Sam is always right and Mother Russia is always wrong. So, that is, I guess, the modus operandi, because the UN Security Council did not approve these sanctions. There's the illegal sanctions applied by basically a bully, the United States. You see what they're doing in Greenland, or trying to do in Greenland, and what they did in Venezuela. So I think countries are starting to get tired of it. But of course, this is what the Western countries do. They only follow international law and a rules-based order when it's convenient for them. When it's not, we don't need any rules. We're adults, you're children. We know when to apply the rules and when to give ourselves an exception. So you just go back in the corner and and contemplate the wall, because we're gonna do what we want, and if you don't like it, just go away, go in the corner, look at the wall. So then they talk about the 500% tariffs on China and India. So the last time they tried to do a 145% tariff on China, they got clubbed over the head with the with being cut off to the access of the rare earths, and it severely affected the automobile industry, because they use that rare earths in automobiles, and if you don't have rare earths, then the automobile's not going to come off the production line. And they also need that for all their weapons that they're promising all these countries throughout the world. And so anyway, that is a dead end. And so also it says here, however, a 10 to 20% across the board tariff on Russian exports could be effective and workable. its merit would be increased if the monies were raised were allocated to Ukraine's defense. Well, nobody knows how much money actually gets to Ukraine's defense. We certainly know that there's golden toilets in Ukraine, and there are wealthy people in Monaco with all these supercars. And in Ukraine, the annual salaries aren't very high, so a lot of money is going off into mysterious places. Of course, there could be some oligarchs with a whole bunch of children, but anyway, and then it talks about seizing the 300 billion in the frozen Russian assets. Well, again, it's the countries that permit that seizure will eventually be liable to repay that amount, and not only that amount, with a whole bunch of probably penalties and interest. And they may not have that money on hand, and that could create a crisis in their country. So why would they even do that? Belgium already said no. And Belgium is not a pro-Russian country. They're just sensible people, and they know that if they push that far enough, they could fall into a trap, and then they would be sunk financially. So, and somewhere in here, well, maybe it's in this article here, there's this website, responsiblestatecraft.org, and so it tells us, this article tells us why sanctions on Russia are literally backfiring. Of course they're backfiring. When you act like a bully against Russia, they're going to just find somewhere else to get their imports and to where they can export. So, and if you look at the Russian ruble, it has increased in value, which means that they're exporting more than they import. So anyway, this whole article again is, they're looking for where they can shut down the Russian economy. They can punish President Putin, and the Russian people will rise up and form a true democracy and destroy the autocracy. Well, President Putin has like 80 or 90% approval rating. So you think that in a democracy, would they vote for anyone else if their president has a high approval rating? So, and which countries in the world have low approval ratings? That's UK, France, Germany, all those truly democratic countries that are serving the people with wisdom and putting their people first before other interests. But of course they aren't. They're going out of their way to finance this war in Ukraine, and they're cutting out the welfare state. So basically they're shooting themselves in the foot so that they can make somebody in Kiev happy, and they have lots of golden toilets. I don't know. But anyway, in this article, let's see now. Here's the last paragraph. Counterproductive consequences. The sanctions should look beyond simple economic measures to consider the long-term risks. Sanctions are not just a cheap, non-violent way of signaling, however, futile public disapproval. Economic costs are not their only downside. The result of sanctions has been a Moscow with greater incentive and ability to pursue future military incursions, enjoying the unquestionable approval of an isolated domestic public and the economic resistance to weather future restrictions. As a result, while sanctions may scratch Washington's itch to resist the invasion, they actually create perverse incentives that undermine future engagement with Moscow on Ukraine and international security more broadly. So, right, if you're going to try to bully Russia and then say, well, let's sit down and talk about, security in the world, and let's come up with agreements. Certainly, Russia is waking up to the fact that the intentions of President Trump during his campaign are not the policies that he's pursuing now. So, and of course, the sanctions have failed, and the more sanctions they have applied, the worse things are for the Europeans and the better things are for Russia, because before Russia was importing a lot of goods from Europe, and then Europe said, you know what, we don't wanna have anything to do with you anymore. So then Russia said, okay, we'll just make the stuff in our country, and you'll be cut off economically. So they said, okay, good, that's okay, you go ahead and do that. So then the growth in the European countries fell, the growth in Russia went up, and they industrialized more, while the Western countries deindustrialized. So who's winning in all of this? And if we go back to this initial point, better sanctions can weaken Russia. Well, keep going, please. More sanctions, because the more sanctions you put, the better it is for Russia, the worse it is for all those who want to bully Russia. So anyway, do the facts say anything else? If you think they do, please put the comments below. And if you like this video, please hit the like button, share, and subscribe. And I look forward to seeing you in future videos. Take care. Bye-bye.